Okay, out of the 1990s and into the new millennium. Talk to me about some of the brands. We've got a Ulysse Nardin on the tray, Ken, and we've also got a Bremont. And we'll come back to these. Yeah. But what are some other brands which come to mind of that era of the new millennium onwards?
For me, the first decade of the new millennium was not a plateau. We'll call it the ascent in credibility of what I call the auteur brands. These are the individuals who set up their companies. They would have been watchmakers that would have started out as really young watchmakers around the time of the quartz crisis in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So you have master watchmakers who now they're barely in their 60s. You had people like Alain Silberstein, who is coming back, who came out with the most outrageous looking watches. They looked little pieces of art. F.P. Journe, who adored the work and was inspired by Breguet. You have De Bethune, which is Denis Flageolet, and David Zanetta, who formed that company, completely radical watches. Roger Dubuis, for example, who I believe was ex-Patek.
Correct. Yeah, was he ex-Patek? Yes, I think he also worked for Muller as well, didn't he?
Yeah, but you had a lot of these watchmakers, and it spans about a 20 or 30 year spread from the earliest ones, which would have been Daniel Roth, Frank Muller, and those guys. The younger ones would be the people at Urwerk, Greubel Forsey, but there must be 50, maybe more, of extremely talented haute horlogerie maestros. They're phenomenal watchmakers. They make incredibly exclusive pieces. You have different approaches. For example, MB&F brings in different designers, different concepts, and they are very rapidly gaining the respect of brands that have 200 years behind them. So you have people like with Laurent Ferrier, H. Moser. We could go on and on and on. And what's wonderful, the reason why they're enabled is because the interest in wristwatches has exploded. And the client base has gone beyond what it would have been in the 50s. In the 50s, the typical customer for a Vacheron would have been a very narrow slice of society. It would have been what we might call the aristocracy, or the 1% or the 0.1%. Now, along with buying a fine motor car or a state-of-the-art sound system or having amazing holidays, people want statement watches. And there is no greater statement than a watch that's basically an auteur product, that it oozes the personality. You see an F.P. Journe, you know what you're looking at. You see a Roger Dubuis, you see any of these pieces, and you know that they're not mass market, you know that they're exclusive, and you know that they're adventurous. And here we have a perfect example of adventurous watchmaking.
I mean, these are both brands that we have here in the showroom here at Watches of Switzerland. Actually, going back to what you were just mentioning, we also have an MB&F. We're the sole agents of MB&F in the UK.
Oh, okay.
We've just taken on the brand. Max himself was here about 2 weeks ago, explaining how his brand has exploded. In very much the same way that you just mentioned there and then. So,
but here with the Freak, we have a company that's been around, that has history, that's challenging the adventurous guys.
Correct. So been around since 1846, I believe. But I remember in 2001, I think it was, when we went to the Basel Fair, and they launched the Freak, and it was Rolf Schneider. I remember him, God rest his soul, And he had, all of a sudden, we had this watch, didn't have a dial, didn't have the button and stem. It had the movement actually built onto the base plate with the escapement. And also it introduced silicon as well to the world of watchmaking. And the Freak really was something, wow, okay, it took us by surprise. And in true Ulysse Nardin, nautical fashion, it had the bright blue dial. But since then, they've done a range of beautiful Freak models, and we've got this example here, which we've got in the showroom today. They've also been experimenting with the case materials as well. So you can see we've got the carbon fiber casing here. Very
Who
light.
do those appeal to? Is it only hardcore watch collectors and enthusiasts?
Originally, yes, but for the very reason that you've been talking about people becoming more educated in more of the brands now, they've brought down the price points on this brand. So this is like £23,000 for the Freak. It was around about £100,000.
Oh, when the original series,
when it first came out. So they've really gone to work on looking at the audience. So who is the customer? A lot of people, across different age groups are coming into. They're quite young.
But the reason they would get away with that, the reason they could succeed with that is, and again, I wish people studied history more. People forget that nearly 40 years ago, Ulysse Nardin brought out the Trilogy of Time,
yes,
which are 3 of the most complicated watches ever produced. They're still around, and no one else has matched them. They have functions that no other watch company has dared to attempt. And this, for those of us who knew Ulysse Nardin, this wasn't a surprise in terms of their capabilities. It was absolutely Ulysse Nardin right down the line, and Rolf, of course.
Yes, and the genius.
Well, this is the other extreme because we're going to classicism here.
We are, this is an ode to the getting back in the English watchmaking, back onto the forefront again. We have Bremont, Nick, and Giles English, and I think it was 2002.
That's when they started talking about it?
Yeah, and I believe it was 2007 when they first
the first watches emerged.
But tell us about Bremont's.
Well, it's interesting because back in 2003, I got this call from a colleague of ours, Lara Menge, about would I speak with this chap who wants to start a watch company. And we met not far from here in a coffee shop in Piccadilly, because it was before Bremont had a company. But he pulled out a case full of the most gorgeous pilot-inspired chronographs. And I don't know if he knew that that's what I was partial to. But he had a dream. This was Nick before I met Giles. And one of the things he said even back then is that British watchmaking has been neglected. Now, here we are 20 years later, and Bremont is a serious company making many thousands of watches. They've had their controversies, which is always part of the growing pains and growing up. But along the way, they've had some achievements that are undeniable. For a short spell, they had Peter Roberts, master watchmaker, working for them, who came up with one of the finest rotating bezels I've ever seen. And in fact, it's on his own watch. It's got a purity, and you know this from rotating the bezels on Bremont watches. They've also done an amazing job in coming out with specific models for squadrons, for example. And beyond their own watches, what I think Bremont must be recognized for is inspiring other British watchmakers. Now, Roger Smith is a different story, because Roger is in a unique position. He was George Daniels, who we spoke about before. He was George Daniels' only student, and he's at the most exclusive end. I think there's even like a 3-year waiting list for one of his pieces. But along the way, we now have a litany of British brands. At every price point, we have Christopher Ward, we have Fears, we have Fairer, and on and on and on. And this is a good thing, because people forget that most of the Swiss-claimed developments were invented by British watchmakers. They can call it the Swiss whatever, but it was English. And that's going back to Arnold and Harris and Graham. So the Swiss are good at borrowing. But Bremont is without question one of the key players in the revival of British watchmaking. One day, I'm hoping we will see movements made entirely in the UK. Completely again, leaving Roger out, because that is a whole different type of watchmaking. But I would love to see actual movements made in their entirety in this country. Well, if in Henley or anywhere.
Yeah. What else can I say? But it's been an experience that I've really enjoyed, and I hope our viewers at Watches Switzerland will be able to enjoy that as well also. So thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure for me.
Being with us today. Thanks,
My
Ken.
pleasure.